Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and this video is going to be the first in what I hope will be a series of sort of introduction level videos bringing people to the table as far as board gaming goes. If you don't know what board gaming is or modern board gaming is, and your only reference to board games is like Monopoly and Risk and Parcheesi and Sorry and Dominoes and Checkers and other things like that, then I want to be able to give you the information that you need to determine whether or not this is something that you'd be into. Little side note here, you likely will be, if you're a human with a pulse, and how you'll determine what games you sort of want to try or get started with right out of the gate. This is going to be a discussion of the base description or the top level description or categorization that I often use when researching games or when discussing games with other potential players, or possibly even just explaining board gaming like I'm doing right now with you guys. And those categorizations are American style games, Euro style games, and then sort of another sub-level within Euro style games, German style games. There is a fourth category that I don't have on the table here just because I don't have any great examples of it, but that would be an abstract style game. I'll touch on that briefly at the end of this video. But basically these 3 or 4 categorizations work on sort of a 2-axis spectrum. You've got the level of direct player-to-player or player-to-game, in the case of a co-op game, conflict or interaction, whether or not you're directly attacking or defending or impacting other players with the actions that you take throughout the course of the game. That's going to be the first axis, the level of conflict or interaction. The second axis is going to be the level of randomness involved in the game. Do you have randomly shuffled decks, whether they be personal or shared? Are you drafting cards around the table, meaning you're all choosing from the same sort of availability of cards, meaning you're not going to have full control over what you get to play? Are you rolling dice? Are you spinning a spinner? Are you pulling random tokens out of an opaque container or bag? All of that is a level of randomness on some sort of degree, and some games have more or less of that, and that sort of fits into these 2 categorizations. So we've got level of conflict and level of randomness. So starting with American style games, which you may also hear referred to as Amerigames, though not that much because that doesn't sound as good as Euro games. Like if you say European style board games, you might as well just shorten that to Euro games because it sounds great. If you say American style board games and then try to shorten that to Amerigames, it just sounds weird. Just doesn't work as good. So most people stick with American style games. You may also hear the term Ameritrash, which sounds insulting or harsh. And I don't use it because I think so too, even though I kind of get where it supposedly comes from, which is that a lot of American style games have their themes based around a lot of the themes of 1970s and 1980s pop, horror, and sci-fi movies, which were sort of considered like trashy cinema. And so it makes sense to sort of fit Ameritrash as the title for this style of game, since it both covers the style and the theme. But it just sounds too mean to me. It sounds like you're calling the game trash, and I don't like that. So I stick with American style board games, as do most people from what I've seen. American style board games have both a high degree of conflict, high degree of player interaction, whether it be good, bad, or otherwise, and a high degree of randomness. So you're going to have games where you're attacking and defending and trying to control territories and playing abilities, whether it be spells or special actions or combos against other players that are directly impacting their pieces, moving them off the board or causing them to discard cards. You're also going to have a high level of randomness, possible multiple decks that are shuffled and randomized at the beginning of the game, dice that you're going to be rolling in combat or for movement. So any game that has a high degree in both of those categories is going to be considered an American style game. And I want to say these are my opinions on how these terms are best used, but I have done a little bit of research online, just looking at Board Game Geek and looking at Wikipedia, and it seems like my personal usage of these terms is more or less in line with the common usages of these terms. So I'm not just flat out confusing you here, but you may have a personal preference on how you apply these terms that doesn't align with mine, and that's perfectly fine. Everybody has their own sort of local meta, their own local way of utilizing things and interpreting things, different vocabulary and categories like I'm using here. So, but American style games. 2 that I have right here are Innis, or Inish, as I've been told that it is possibly pronounced. I think it's in ancient Celtic, which I guess would be Gaelic. And then Memoir 44. So these 2 games both utilize a high degree of randomness. They have dice. They're directly conflicting. It's me versus you, or us versus that guy, or a free-for-all 4-way where you're trying to control territory and attack other clans and knock them out of that area by literally removing them from the board. Going into battle or assaulting a specific hex where there's other units and shooting at those units and attempting to pick them off the board. And the player who wins is the player who is the most successful at eliminating the opponent's pieces and controlling more area or controlling a specific space. Those are very strictly American style games as far as I'm concerned, or considered concerned. I can never get those right. Moving on from American style, we've got Euro style. I've got these two games over here, Concordia and Raiders of the North Sea. Euro style games keep some of the randomness, not all of it. They kind of reduce the amount of randomness, and they drastically reduce the amount of conflict. In a lot of Euro style games, you're not directly interacting with the other players at all, other than by what's referred to as blocking. Say, for example, there are 3 options that can be taken at any given point during a game, but each round, each one of those options can only be taken once. Well, in a 3-player game, you don't want to be the 3rd player in that turn order, because that means you're going to be strictly limited to whatever hasn't been picked yet. And if the other players know what you're hoping to do based off of what you appear to be trying to do, because obviously they can see what you're playing and they can try to guess your strategy, they might intentionally take the action out of those available that they think you want to take just so that you can't take it. That's called a block. They're not directly attacking you. They're not causing you to discard cards, they're not removing your pieces from the board or anything like that, but they're causing you to have to shift your plans by going after the options that you were hoping to take. It's a much more passive way of interacting with opponents, and some Euro games don't even have that. They have, an even more subtle version of that, where really it's just you trying to do the best that you can on your player board while everybody else does the same, and whoever comes out on top at the end, or whoever did the best at playing the game at the end, is the winner. So a much lower level of conflict. There's also a much lower level of randomness. There might be a random deck of cards that's shuffled at the beginning of the game. There might be, randomized tokens for different stages of the game that come out at the beginning of the game. But the way I like to sort of determine the difference between the level of randomness here in an American style game and the level of randomness here in a Euro style game is that in an American style game, the randomness continues to randomize throughout the course of the game. Decks will constantly be shuffled. New cards will be mixed up and spit out and drafted. Dice will be rolled at specific points throughout the game. So the randomness continues in an American style game. In a Euro style game, the randomness is often just part of the setup. So maybe you have a board and it shows that there are 6 stages to this game, and each of those stages has a special bonus scenario or a bonus ability that can be utilized or activated. And maybe those 6 sort of random abilities, or those 6 abilities, are randomized at the beginning of the game. Maybe there are 12 in the box, but out of those 12 you only pull 6 and put them on the board. That's a good mechanic, because that actually means the game changes every time you play it because of those 6 pieces being randomized. But that is a little bit of randomization. However, it only occurs at the setup of the game. Those pieces are set once the game has begun. The randomness doesn't continue to shift as the game goes on. Same with a deck of cards. You might have a deck of cards, but usually in a Euro-style game, it's a relatively large deck of cards, and it'll be shuffled, but because it's so large, you're usually not going to get through the entire thing and have to shuffle it again, and even if you do, it's usually only once. So for the most part, though that deck is shuffled, it is set in that position once the game has begun. It doesn't continue to shift. So in Euro-style games, less randomness, and the randomness that you do have is kind of set up at the beginning and then left alone, versus American-style games where you have a lot of player interaction versus very little, and lots of randomness that continues to shift throughout the course of the game. Then we get on to German-style games. Now, this may be a bit of a sticking point for some people that have heard these terms before, because often German can be used interactively or interchangeably with Euro-style game, but to me it's sort of a subset. It's the next level down of reducing these two factors. You have almost no player interaction, and you have almost no randomness. These two games here are good examples of this. Oh, and I forgot to mention these two games here, Raiders of the North Sea and Concordia, both great Euro-style games, both have great boards, lots of interactions that affect other players, but none directly. It's things like, oh, I traded in this region, so you get some additional resources, good for you. Or I took this location in a raid, so now you can't raid there because I already did it, which is more of a block. They don't have any player-to-player direct interactions that I can think of. They don't utilize things like dice in a way that affects other players. Again, Euro games sometimes have randomization to them. Raiders of the North Sea does have some dice, but it's not a dice mechanic that really involves other players. You're sort of just randomizing whether or not you get the little victory point score or the big victory point score every time that you raid a location. And again, there is some deck shuffling, but but it's shuffled once at the beginning of the game and then left alone for the most part. Same in Concordia. There is some deck shuffling, but it's shuffled once and left alone. There is some randomization of city tile placement on the board, but once it's set up at the beginning of the game, they never move. So that's just randomizing the map so that the game has more replayability. That's not a randomization factor that constantly comes up during the game. Euro-style games like Terra Mystica, spectacular game that I haven't yet done a review on, but I very much plan to, and Caverna, the Cave Farmers, which I believe I haven't done a review on, but I very much plan to. These are great examples, in my opinion, of German-style board games, which is sort of a subcategory of Euro-style board games. These have little to no randomization other than setting up the board and possibly shuffling some tiles or cards. And then little to no randomization as far as rolling dice or really anything. For the most part, in German-style games, the action that you take is going to have the effect that it is intended to, and that's it. The actions available to you are pretty much static throughout the course of the game, or if they change in an additive way, meaning maybe you'll start the game with 6 possible actions, and every round of the game, you'll add a new action. So the original 6 will always be there, but maybe you'll gain some new ones as the game goes on. And all players around the board will likely have access to those same actions. So the game comes down to, or winning the game comes down to, you making the right choice anytime you're given the option to make a choice. It's not the luck of the draw. It's not the roll of the dice. It's completely on you. Did you make the best decision every time it came to you to make a decision on what to do? Should I move this piece here? Should I take that action? Should I opt for the coins over the immediate victory points in hopes that I can spend the coins next turn on something that will earn me more victory points? And all of that is splayed out in front of you. All of those options are available for everyone to see. It's just, what do you pick to do? It's entirely on you and your decisions. So it's much more about your strategy and your planning and your thinking, versus you can kind of go by your gut and try some crazy stuff in an American style game. And in a Euro style game, it's much more, you have to be aware of what other players are doing because they might have a little bit of an impact on you and you might have a little bit of an impact on them. And so that might shift your plans a little bit. German style games are very much, I'm here playing my game on my board. Sure, maybe there's a map that we're sharing and maybe I have to partially look up and go, okay, you took that, so I'm not going to go there, I'm going to go there instead. But a lot of the time you're looking at your board, your sort of player sheet, your tokens, your resources, your workers, and you're deciding what you should do based off of the current state of the game that would be the best for you. And that's it. So those are the sort of 3 different levels of this. You've got high conflict, high interaction, and high randomness. You've got moderate randomness, moderate to low randomness, and moderate to low interaction. And you've got low randomness to none and low interaction to none in German style games. The 4th category that I mentioned, abstract style games. Again, I don't have any great examples that I could put out on the board, but they're games that you know. Checkers is an abstract style game. It's got a series of pieces on a board. There isn't really a theme to it. There isn't really a style or look to it other than possibly some different shapes to denote different pieces. It's just, here's this piece, it moves like this, and it does this. And here's this piece, and it moves like this, and it does this. And then here is the structure of how the game works, like checkers. A piece can move diagonally, and if you hop over another piece, you take that piece, and if you get to the back row, you get to king that piece, and then it gets to do these things. That's the whole game. The board doesn't change, how the pieces work doesn't change. Both players are playing by the same rules. There's no story to it. There's no backstory behind checkers of like, oh, you're a warring nation against an enemy warring nation. And, maybe one day there, or in the past there was at one point, but now it's just checkers. It's just, here are the pieces, they move like this. Same in chess. Here are the pieces, they move like this. Maybe originally there was some story of, the armies of 2 kings battling over a sovereign territory. But now it's just chess. It's, here are the pieces, each one moves exactly like this and can do exactly these specific things, and you always start with the exact same set of pieces laid out in the exact same way and follow the same order on the same size board. It's abstract. It's, here are some pieces that move in a certain way simply because we say they do, on a board that looks like this simply because we say it does, and that's the structure of the game. There's no theme, there's no art style or art direction behind it. I mean, you can get artistic chess sets, obviously, but that doesn't change the way the game works, and it doesn't fit into why the game works the way it does. Why can a rook move the way that it does versus a bishop moves the way that it does? And again, I'm sure there's a lot of history behind that. Chess is a very old game, but it's abstract. Now, when you play it, it's just this piece moves this way because it does, because the rules say it does. That's it. So yeah, games like Go and Go and dominoes and chess and checkers and any other game that is just kind of pieces on a board that do a certain thing because that's the rule of the game, is an abstract game. And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with any of these categories, in my opinion. But the way that you might utilize this information is very powerful. So, sorry, I'm getting a tickle in my throat here. I always forget to bring a drink on these videos. So, sorry, the way that you utilize this information is important and very powerful, because you might have a group of friends that are relatively new to gaming, and maybe you happen to know that a person in that group can get very easily irritated if they feel like they're getting ganged up on. And a lot of times people that get that way with games and with other things in life might feel that way before it's actually happening, or even when it's not actually happening. So maybe a game that involves a lot of player-to-player conflict isn't a good type of game to include that player in. Maybe something that's a little bit more passive, like a Euro game. Maybe you have a group of players that just want to have kind of a fun time, and maybe you've been doing some drinking of wine or something like that, and they're a little bit fuzzy, and you don't want anything that's too, really hard, focused, and strategic. German style might not be the way to go at that point, because that's all German style games are. It's just you sitting there running numbers and crunching possibilities and trying to think strategically turns and turns ahead based off of this massive skew of options that you have in front of you. And that might not be something that your group is into. Maybe your group might find Euro style games boring because there's not enough player interaction, and they really want to, punch that guy and shoot that guy and swing my sword. Well, that's much more of an American style game. So you can use this information. I don't know who you would invite to play an abstract style game. I guess if you know a person that likes that specific game, you would play that specific game with them. I don't think I would ever invite people over for a rousing night of chess. That's just not how that game works. And it's nothing against chess. I know how to play, barely. Like, I know the way the pieces move, and that's about it. Nothing against that game, but that's a totally different thing, right? You wouldn't just invite a group of people over and go, yeah, we're gonna play a checkers tournament. Like, that's really different, So yeah, knowing that information and knowing how these three different genres kind of work can be very useful. If somebody's telling you about a game and it sounds really cool, and then all of a sudden they go, well, and also, it's a German style game, so there's really not a lot, you might go, okay, well, my group doesn't really love German style games. I know how they work, and I know what my group likes. I have a feeling that won't fit with them. Or again, maybe you have a group of friends that they're just very passive, and they don't like playing games where they have to directly attack other players. They feel awkward or bad about doing that. Or maybe you have one player who gets frustrated when people start attacking them because they feel like they're getting ganged up on. If you have a player like that, you should probably talk to them about it, because that's an issue. But yeah, maybe that you just, once you learn what type of game a game is in this structure of these 3 or 4 categories, you can determine whether or not it's good for you, good for your group, good for a specific group, good for new players. I can't think of a single German style game that I would start new players on. It seems mean. I don't know. Euro style games are pretty good. If they're a more, active, want to get out there and start swinging type of group, then maybe an American style game is good. Or just based off stuff they've played in the past, you might want to go with one versus the other. German is not really a new player's zone, but it's absolutely a great category to delve into once you want something that's a little more, like I said, just strategic and almost strenuous. Some German style games, the longer ones, the larger ones, can last 2, 3, 4 or more hours. And the whole time you're just racking your brain trying to solve this puzzle while everybody else is basically racing against you to do the same thing. And they're often large and beautiful and complex, and I love them. But again, I wouldn't start anybody on a German style game. So it's good to know these things, and it's good to have these 3 categories, and personally I have a good mix of these games in my collection, and I'll continue to have a good mix of these games in my collection because I like them all. They all serve a purpose, they all have a different feel and style, and I enjoy all of them. But anyways, this has been a quick overview of what I would consider the top level ways of categorizing games, that being American style versus Euro style versus German, and then of course you kind of have abstract off doing its own thing. But yeah, I hope you guys have gotten a little something out of this video. I hope that you feel like this is useful information, or I hope you just enjoyed listening to me talk for probably like half an hour. If not, I'm sure you'll let me know. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you have time, please go down below and subscribe to let me know that you want more content like this. Leave a comment so we can chit chat. Let me know what you thought about the video, whether you liked it or disliked it. And on that note, leave a like or a dislike, if you wanted to go with a shorthand option and not have to type anything and just click, that's good too. But other than that, I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good night.